And back to exercise 102, which talked about misleading graphs. Now that you've looked at graphs and know the importance of appropriate scales and keeping things in proportion, so when you're constructing a column graph, all columns are the same width, sometimes those features aren't adhered to, and the result is that the graph can be quite misleading. So you can see here it says that if a graph doesn't have a scale even, we may be getting the wrong message from the graph. Having an uneven scale or only showing parts of a scale can also be misleading, or result in a graph that makes us come to conclusions that are incorrect, and not showing the correct position of the 0 on the scale. So it's so much about the scale, especially on graphs that are built around an X and Y axis. You will see other misleading graphs where the quantities are being maybe displayed using a 3D figure, so a solid figure, and once we start to change the shape and size of the dimensions of the 3D figure, then we can give some misleading information. It's very difficult to predict what sort of a graph you might be given and have to make a comment about whether it's misleading or not and why it's misleading, because there's an infinite number of ways you can go about producing something that's misleading. So just be open to that. So these three graphs all display the same information, and you can see the graphs look quite different to one another. So with graph A, there's even some misleading information could be taken from this graph unless we looked very closely. You might think, because all these graphs are showing the increase in sales of notebooks over a 5-week period, the fact that this is starting in that position may make you think that at the beginning there was, of this time frame where they're collecting their data, there were actually 0 mark books, just because of the position of the graph at the intersection of the two axes. We tend to think of that as 0. However, looking much more carefully, you can see that in the beginning they actually were selling 10 notebooks per week. So I would say that's the misleading feature of that graph. The vertical axis doesn't show the position of 0. With the second one, we've got a terrible scale here. You can't allocate 16 sales to this small area, and this small distance on the axis, and then spread out even a greater distance on the axis, but only call it 4 more. And then we've gone to a similar sort of distance on the axis, and now we're referring to it as 10, and then same distance, but we're only referring with it only counts a change of 2. So that's very, very misleading. With the third graph, they've been able to produce an exaggerated looking curve by shortening the horizontal axis. So that's a way in which you can present data that can be misleading.